Welcome to Life Stories, where we share heartfelt journeys of love, loss, and triumph. Today, we bring you an inspiring tale of a mother's unwavering strength as she rebuilds her life after heartbreak. Abandoned by the man she loved, Emily faced the impossible, raising her newborn twins alone while finding a way to turn her pain into purpose. Through determination, resilience, and love, she transformed her life and became a beacon of hope for others. Subscribe to Life Stories and join us as we dive into Emily's journey of courage and renewal. Let's begin today's story. I remember the day Ryan left as vividly as if it were yesterday. It wasn't just the act of leaving, it was the sharp edge of betrayal, cutting deeper than any wound I had ever known. I had just given birth to our twins, barely out of the haze of exhaustion and joy that comes with welcoming new life. Our small apartment in Brooklyn was far from luxurious, but it was warm, alive, and filled with hope. At least, that's what I thought at the time. Ryan had always been the center of my world. He wasn't just my husband, he was my best friend, my confidant, the man who had once looked at me as if I were the only person who mattered. But that morning, everything changed. I later learned that the decision wasn't entirely his, though that did little to lessen the pain. It was his mother's shadow that loomed over us, a woman whose approval Ryan had chased his entire life. In her grand estate in Greenwich, where marble floors gleamed and manicured gardens stretched endlessly, Ryan's mother orchestrated the end of our marriage with a chilling precision. She had always been distant with me, her sharp eyes appraising me as though I were some trinket unworthy of her son. She made it clear I was an outsider, someone who didn't belong in their world of wealth and prestige. "You'll never be enough for him," she had told Ryan that morning, her voice cool and deliberate. "Emily doesn't have the lineage, the background, or the position to match our family." I wasn't there to witness the exchange, but I could imagine it vividly. Ryan, seated in their grand living room, shrinking under the weight of her words, his love for me battling with the expectations that had been drilled into him since childhood. Ryan told me later that he tried to argue, but his voice had no strength against hers. "This isn't fair," he had said, a whisper of defiance. But fairness wasn't a luxury his mother allowed. She dismissed his protests, claiming she was protecting their legacy, ensuring he wouldn't throw away their family's future for a fleeting infatuation. I didn't know any of this when Ryan walked through our door later that day. I was cradling one of our twins, humming softly to soothe her. The sight of him brought a wave of relief. "Ryan," I said, smiling, "we've been waiting for you." But something was different. His shoulders sagged, and his eyes avoided mine. I didn't understand the weight he carried until he sat me down and spoke the words that shattered my world. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I just can't." At first, I didn't understand. "What do you mean? What can't you do?" My voice trembled, the beginnings of panic creeping in. He looked away, clenching his fists as if trying to muster the courage to continue. "It's over, Emily. My mother was right, we don't belong together. I can't give you the life you deserve." The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at him, my mind refusing to process his words. "Your mother," I managed to choke out. "You're leaving me because of her." Ryan stood, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm sorry," he mumbled before turning and walking out the door, the sound of it closing echoing in the apartment. He didn't look back, not at me, not at our daughters, not at the life we had built together. The moment he left, the air in the room grew heavy, almost suffocating. I held my baby closer, her tiny warmth the only thing anchoring me to reality. Tears spilled freely down my face as I struggled to comprehend what had just happened. How could the man who had promised to love and cherish me abandon us so easily? How could he choose wealth and legacy over his own children? The first few weeks after Ryan left were a blur of tears, sleepless nights, and a deep, aching loneliness. The twins' cries filled the nights, mingling with my own sobs. Every corner of our apartment seemed to echo with memories of him, of us, of the promises we had made. I was drowning, barely able to keep my head above water, and yet I knew I couldn't afford to break. My daughters needed me. Looking back, I realized that was the moment something shifted inside me. As I watched my twins sleep one quiet morning, their peaceful faces a stark contrast to the chaos in my heart, I made a promise. I would not let Ryan's abandonment define us. I would not let his mother's judgment dictate our worth. My girls deserved a future filled with love, security, and happiness, and I was determined to give it to them. But determination alone wasn't enough. The journey ahead was daunting, and I was stepping into the unknown, armed with nothing but the fierce love I had for my children and the fragile hope that things could get better. The days after Ryan's departure were the hardest I'd ever faced. Each morning, I woke with a knot of dread in my stomach, wondering how I would make it through another day. But every time I looked at my daughters, their tiny hands curling instinctively around my fingers, I found the strength to keep going. They were so innocent, so full of potential, and they depended on me completely. I couldn't let them down. At first, survival was my only goal. I fell into a routine, though it was more out of necessity than purpose. The twins demanded everything from me: feeding, changing, rocking them to sleep, and there were moments when the sheer weight of it all felt unbearable. But even in those moments, there was something profoundly grounding about their presence. Their cries reminded me that life was still moving forward, whether I wanted it to or not. One evening, as I sat on the couch folding the same honestlies for what felt like the 100th time, I thought about Ryan. I imagined him in his mother's mansion, surrounded by opulence, perhaps even comforted by the decision he'd made. Did he ever think of us? Did he miss the warmth of our little home, the way the twins' laughter filled the space, or the simple joy of holding them in his arms? The thought hurt more than I wanted to admit, but I quickly pushed it aside. Dwelling on what might have been wouldn't change anything. Instead, I turned my focus inward. I had to figure out how to rebuild, not just for my daughters, but for myself. I didn't want them to grow up seeing me as a broken, defeated woman. I wanted to be someone they could look up to, someone who showed them that strength could emerge from the deepest pain. It was during one of those sleepless nights, with the twins finally dozing in their crib, that an idea began to take shape. I had always loved crafting and sewing, a skill passed down from my grandmother. The act of creating something with my hands had always brought me peace, even in the most chaotic times. As I watched my daughters sleep, I thought about the simple honestlies they wore and how much more special they could be with a personal touch. Maybe, just maybe, this was something I could do. The next morning, I pulled out my old sewing machine, a relic I hadn't touched in years. The sight of it brought a surprising rush of excitement, as though it held the key to a version of myself I'd forgotten. While the twins napped, I began experimenting with fabrics, patterns, and designs. The process wasn't easy, there were mistakes, moments of frustration, and more than a few pricked fingers, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of purpose. As the days turned into weeks, my confidence grew. I started making little outfits for the twins, each piece a reflection of my love for them. Friends and neighbors began to notice, complimenting the unique designs and even asking if I could make pieces for their own children. Their encouragement sparked something inside me, the possibility that this hobby could become something more. I decided to take a leap of faith. Using what little savings I had, I purchased more supplies and set up a small online shop, naming it My Little Miracles in honor of my daughters. The name felt perfect. These two tiny beings had given me the strength to rediscover myself and the courage to dream again. At first, the orders trickled in slowly, just enough to keep me busy in the evenings while the twins slept. But word spread quickly, and before I knew it, I was filling more orders than I'd ever imagined. Each outfit I sent out felt like a small victory, a tangible reminder that I was capable of building something meaningful from the ruins of my past. Though the journey was just beginning, I could feel a shift within me. I was no longer just surviving, I was creating, growing, and finding joy in the little moments. My daughters were still too young to understand the changes happening around them. But one day, I hoped they would see how their existence had saved me. They were my strength, my inspiration, and my reason to keep moving forward. Ryan's absence still lingered in the background, like a faint echo of the life we once shared. But with every passing day, his shadow grew smaller. The home he had abandoned was no longer defined by his departure but by the love, resilience, and determination that filled it. Slowly but surely, we were finding our way. As the days turned into months, the transformation of my life began to take root. The initial struggles of starting my business had been daunting, but each small success fueled my determination. The once quiet apartment now buzzed with a different kind of energy, a rhythm of work and care that filled every corner. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was undeniably mine. And that realization gave me a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Balancing my roles as a mother and an entrepreneur was anything but easy. My days were a blur of diaper changes, feedings, and sewing late into the night. The twins, unaware of the challenges I faced, became my little cheerleaders. Their giggles and the sight of them peacefully napping in their crib gave me the motivation to push through exhaustion and doubts. One evening, after a particularly long day of fulfilling orders, I paused to reflect on how far we'd come. Stacks of neatly folded baby outfits surrounded me, each one a testament to the countless hours I had poured into this dream. My Little Miracles was no longer just an idea, it was a thriving reality. Customers' messages began pouring in, stories of how my designs brought joy to their families. Photos of smiling babies in my creations lit up my inbox, each one a reminder that my work mattered, that I was creating something meaningful beyond the confines of our home. But it wasn't just about the business. It was about reclaiming myself. The Emily I had been with Ryan, loving, trusting, and devoted, had been left shattered by his departure. Yet, in piecing my life back together, I discovered parts of myself I had long ignored. I was stronger than I ever thought possible, capable of navigating the storms of life with resilience and grace. Of course, there were moments of weakness. Late at night, when the apartment was silent, my thoughts often wandered back to Ryan. I'd imagine him in the grandeur of his mother's mansion, surrounded by the wealth and power he had chosen over us. Did he regret his decision? Did he miss the life we had built together? These thoughts came less frequently over time, but when they did, they stung like fresh wounds. One particular evening, I found myself holding one of the twins as she slept, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine. I thought about the promises Ryan had made to me, how he had vowed to stand by my side no matter what. It hurt to realize how easily those promises had been broken. Yet, as I looked at my daughter's peaceful face, I knew I couldn't dwell on the pain. My daughters were my future, and they deserved a mother who was present, not one weighed down by the ghosts of the past. Despite everything, I couldn't deny that Ryan's abandonment had taught me invaluable lessons. I had learned the importance of self-reliance, of finding strength within myself rather than in others. I had discovered the profound depth of a mother's love, a love that could move mountains and rebuild worlds. And most importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't tied to someone else's opinion of me, not even Ryan's. As the business grew, so did my confidence. I began to see myself not just as a single mother or a woman rebuilding her life, but as someone capable of achieving great things. Opportunities started to arise, offers to collaborate with other small businesses, invitations to local markets, and even features in online parenting blogs. Each milestone was a reminder of how far I'd come, of the power of perseverance and belief in oneself. The twins, now toddling around the apartment, became an endless source of joy and laughter. They were too young to understand the challenges I had faced, But I hoped that one day they would see the strength it took to create a life for us. They were my driving force, the light that had guided me through the darkest moments. As I tucked them into bed one night, I whispered softly, "We've got this. My little miracles." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I truly believed it. Our journey was far from over. But I knew we were heading toward something beautiful. Something that was ours alone. The turning point came on a crisp autumn afternoon. I was busy packing orders when a knock on the door pulled me away from my work. A deliveryman handed me a package I hadn't ordered, a magazine with a note tucked inside. The note read, "Your story inspired me. Thank you for showing that resilience is possible." Curious, I flipped through the pages and found an article about my little miracles. It was surreal seeing my story in print. The piece painted me as a determined entrepreneur and a loving mother. Someone who had turned adversity into opportunity. It wasn't just about the clothes I designed, but about the message I was sending, that even in the face of heartbreak, it's possible to rebuild and thrive. The article brought a flood of orders and messages from mothers across the country. Women shared their stories of struggle and triumph, many expressing how my journey gave them hope. It was overwhelming but profoundly moving. For so long, I had felt isolated in my pain, but now I saw how my experience connected me to others. I wasn't just building a business, I was building a community. With this newfound momentum, I decided it was time to take the next step. I reached out to local boutiques to pitch the idea of carrying my designs. Walking into those meetings felt like stepping into uncharted territory. I was no longer the uncertain woman piecing her life back together. I was a business owner with a vision. The first few meetings were nerve-wracking, but each one left me more confident. By the end of the month, My Little Miracles was featured in 3 boutiques, and I had signed a deal to expand into a neighboring city. Amid all the growth and excitement, my daughters remained the center of my world. Their laughter echoed through the apartment, filling it with a joy that no amount of success could match. I made it a point to involve them in the little victories, celebrating with them when we hit milestones. Even if it was just with cupcakes and balloons in our tiny kitchen. They didn't fully understand the significance, but their giggles and cheers were enough to make every late night and early morning worth it. One evening, as I rocked one of the twins to sleep, she clutched a small blanket I had made. It was a simple piece, stitched together during those early, chaotic days after Ryan left. Seeing her small fingers wrapped around it brought back memories of those nights when I doubted I could make it through. Now, here I was, not just surviving but thriving. That blanket, much like my life, was imperfect but filled with love and determination. Of course, Ryan's shadow lingered in the background. Occasionally, I would hear updates about him through mutual acquaintances. He was still living in his mother's mansion, still immersed in the wealth and power he had chosen. But the more I heard, the more I realized how hollow that life seemed. The grand parties, the expensive cars, the accolades, they were all a facade. A desperate attempt to fill a void he refused to acknowledge. One day, I found myself scrolling through photos of the twins on my phone, snapshots of their first steps, their messy smiles after devouring ice cream, their wide-eyed wonder at the world around them. A pang of sadness hit me as I thought about Ryan. He was missing all of this. These moments that made life so rich and meaningful. I didn't hate him anymore, instead, I pitied him. He had sacrificed so much for a legacy that would never bring him true happiness. That evening, as I closed up shop and settled in for the night, I realized something profound. I was free. Free from the pain of his abandonment. Free from the doubts that once held me back. Free to create a life that was entirely my own. For the first time, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. My daughters and I had built something beautiful. And nothing, no shadow of the past, no lingering regrets, could take that away from us. With that thought, I kissed my sleeping daughters goodnight and whispered, "We're doing just fine. My little miracles." And in the quiet of the night, I let myself believe it completely. As the years passed, my life began to settle into a rhythm that felt natural and fulfilling. My little miracles was thriving. And the twins were growing into lively, curious children who filled our home with laughter. Each day felt like a step further from the pain of the past. A life reclaimed and rebuilt from the ashes of abandonment. Then one day, the past came rushing back with a simple message. It was a friend from college. Someone who had moved into the same social circles as Ryan. The message read, "Turn on channel 4. You'll want to see this." Curious and slightly apprehensive, I switched on the TV. The screen filled with images of a news feature about a local entrepreneur, me. I watched, slightly stunned, as the segment unfolded, highlighting my journey and showcasing my business. They even included footage of the twins playing in the park. Their innocent laughter captured in soft, sunlit moments. The anchor's voice spoke of resilience, of a mother who had turned hardship into hope. Somewhere in Greenwich, Ryan was watching too. I didn't know it then. But later, I would learn how that moment shook him to his core. Sitting alone in the grandeur of his mother's mansion, surrounded by the trappings of wealth he had chosen over us. He saw a life he had walked away from, a life he no longer had any claim to. The next day, I received a message from him. It was short, hesitant, and completely unexpected. "Emily, can we talk?" I stared at the words on my screen, my heart pounding. It had been years since I had heard from Ryan. Years since the sound of his voice had echoed in our small apartment. My initial reaction was anger. How dare he try to come back after everything? But as the hours passed, that anger gave way to something more complex. Curiosity. Closure. Perhaps. I needed to hear what he had to say. Not for him but for myself. When he arrived at my apartment a week later, he looked like a man who had been carrying the weight of the world. His tailored suit hung loosely on his frame, and his eyes, once so bright with confidence, were shadowed by regret. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, filled with all the things we had left unsaid. Finally, I broke the silence. "What do you want, Ryan?" He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I saw the segment about you and the girls," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've done incredible things." I crossed my arms, unwilling to let his compliment sway me. "And you've come here to tell me that now? After all these years?" He looked up at me then, his expression raw and unguarded. "Emily, I made a mistake," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought I was doing the right thing, listening to my mother, protecting the family legacy. But I was wrong. I've been wrong about so much." His words hung in the air, but they didn't land the way I think he'd hoped. The Emily he had known, the one who would have broken at his apology, desperate for any sign of redemption, was long gone. I had built a life without him. A life filled with meaning and joy. And I wasn't about to let his regret undo that. "I'm glad you've realized that, Ryan," I said, my voice steady. "But your realization doesn't change anything. You left us. You made your choice. And we've made ours. The girls and I are happy, and we don't need you to come back and complicate that." He looked as though I had struck him, his shoulders sagging under the weight of my words. "I know I can't undo the past," he said, "but I want to try to be part of their lives. Even if it's just a small part." For a moment, I wavered. The twins deserved to know their father, didn't they? But then I thought about the nights I had spent alone, rocking them to sleep, wondering how I would make it through. I thought about the promises Ryan had broken, the way he had walked away when we needed him most. "No, Ryan," I said firmly. "You don't get to come back now. The girls and I are doing just fine without you." His face crumpled as the truth of my words sank in. He had lost us, not just as a family but as a part of his life. I felt a twinge of pity for him, but it was fleeting. The life I had built was mine, and I wasn't about to let anyone, not even Ryan, disrupt that. As I closed the door behind him, I felt a sense of finality. This chapter was over. And for the first time, I truly believed I was free from its shadow. The life Ryan had chosen to abandon had flourished without him, and I was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. As I watched my twins play in the golden glow of the afternoon sun, their laughter filling our cozy home, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but every step had brought us closer to this moment, a life filled with love, resilience, and joy. Ryan's return had reminded me of how far we had come, but his absence was no longer a burden. It was a lesson. A reminder that strength often comes from within and that the choices we make define our future. My story isn't just about heartbreak, it's about hope, growth, and the power of starting over. It's proof that even in our darkest moments, we can find light. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales of courage and resilience. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to share.